Okay, I want to do another take on misandry and misogyny. Um, Basically, as the problem I see with some feminist theory is that it show it it simply shows that under in every circumstance, whether whether something directly is harmful to women or something is directly harmful to men, it shows a patriarchal theme. So again, the problem with feminist theory is that it erroneously concludes that every instance where something is harmful to men as a group directly, and when something is harmful directly to women as a group, it still shows a patriarchal theme. So since there's a patriarchal theme, we must still conclude that it is a man's world and that men benefit. And just to reword that, men, what the feminists would assert, not just, many branches of feminists asserts that almost every disadvantage that is directed towards men, and which favors women, still proves a patriarchal world where men overall get the benefit. Okay, so in a global, so what I'm trying to say is that even if a man is being disadvantaged, like let's take for example, a man, a woman can hit a man, but a man cannot hit a woman. That, from my perspective, that is misandry. From a large segment of feminists, that is a disadvantage towards men that proves a patriarchal structure. It proves a patriarchal theme where overall in a global context, men are gaining an advantage or have an inherent advantage. And for that example, they would explain it like this. I'll open up the door here. A woman that hits a woman to make the claim, a woman that cannot hit a man, or a man that cannot hit a woman, yes, a woman is gaining an advantage, has an advantage, but the theme is that a woman cannot protect herself. The theme is that a woman is weaker. The theme is that a woman is always has a greater potency to become a victim. So they would interpret that as this woman needs to be protected, and based on this protection, this woman is depending on men. Not to say that the woman cannot protect other women, but men primarily or preferably to protect them. So therefore, they are dependent on men, and they are not free to protect themselves. So that is how a feminist would look at what I would call misandry. However, so you see how something that from their mind appears to be against men, they say in the global context is against women because they are not free. They're not free of protecting themselves. That's one example of how feminist theory somehow desensitizes misandry immensely. Now let's go to another example. Responsibility, the concept of responsibility. Where women are more great, if women share a greater responsibility, or in any area where women share a greater responsibility, let's say in the family, child raising, that's one where women explicitly feel they share a greater responsibility. That means if something goes wrong in the home, or something goes wrong in child raising, the woman implicitly gets a greater amount of blame. Okay. Sexual chastity responsibility. Women make the valid claim that they carry a greater responsibility in conforming to modesty than men. Okay. Those two things. Okay. The greater responsibility is seen as a form of patriarchy. It's seen as a form of sexism against women. Now, when you show instances where men have a greater responsibility, or they're perceived to have a greater responsibility, it's still perceived as sexism against women. It's still seen as a patriarchy, fully and completely. Now, the feminists who notice, who acknowledge the disadvantage in these cases will say, yes, we understand that directly this man as a single human being, and men as a group in this particular context are at a disadvantage. However, what they will try to argue is that there's a theme that overrides this disadvantage that favors men. So in responsibility, if men carry a greater responsibility, like for example, there is an interpretation in the Bible where Adam has a greater responsibility for the sin of the garden. They will argue that this responsibility is implicit of power, that it shows that men have a greater power to control their own lives, and since they have a greater power to control their own lives, they're saying that women do not have that power to control their own lives, and that's treating a woman like a child. So that is a form of misogyny, and that shows patriarchy. Okay, now I'll give an example where indirectly it shows that men have a greater responsibility, but I'll also show to you where, feminists have exposed this as misogyny. I'll give you one classic example. Women getting the right to fight in the military. Women should have the same right to fight in the military as men. It is their country. In that right, they carry equal responsibility. They carry equal responsibility as men in this country as it being their own. That was clear purpose of having women's rights in the military. Now, people don't see the misandry. And as a matter of fact, when it's framed that way, the misandry is not even seen. What is not exposed is that giving men the greater responsibility to fight in the country also means that men's lives are more disposable than women. Because since they have a greater responsibility to fight for their country, it's not a necessary conclusion or inherent logical conclusion, but as a result of that, they are also required to sacrifice their life and make their life less valuable than women's. And the thing about the misogynistic themes, what it fails to ignore is that women's lives were considered more valuable because they can reproduce. That's the claim. Okay, men are supposed to sacrifice their lives for women. That is a social implicit theme in our society. That in of itself cannot imply misogyny. That can only apply misandry. It can't. That's just the way it is. There's no way to look at that. Now, women gaining equal rights in the military, gaining equal rights to die in the military, is simply, it's simply elevating, elevating man's worth, man's life. A man's life is becoming equal to a woman's life in terms of being sacrificed. So you can't sit there and say that it is overwhelmingly or globally, women's rights in the military is globally fundamentally simply a women's issue of being equal to men. Because I will say this, if by chance there were situations where women's lives were considered less than men's, it would be considered misogyny. That's just the way it is. So I give you those examples, and I hope you guys think about those examples, because I think those examples are very important. All right, have a nice day.